is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Shigeru Ishiba begins his first overseas trip as Japan's Prime Minister in Southeast Asia. First to Malaysia and continuing to Indonesia to strengthen economic and defense ties. Yoon Suk Yeol's legal team says that the impeached South Korean president will respect the Constitutional Court's ruling, even if it means removal from office. Rescue operations in Tibet have wound down following Tuesday's earthquake. Authorities are now shifting focus to resettling survivors and rebuilding. China accuses the European Union of discriminatory trade practices, marking the latest salvo in long-running trade tensions between the two economic powers. Also in East Asia tonight, China's next generation train is set to break records, running as fast as 450 kilometers per hour as the country continues a march to expand its high-speed network. What do these achievements mean for its railway ambitions? And we take you to the U.S., where wildfires are raging around Los Angeles, scorching more than 10,000 hectares of land, gutting communities, and forcing at least 100,000 residents to flee. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is set to begin his Southeast Asia visit, which will see him travel to Malaysia, followed by Indonesia. Well, it is his first trip overseas since taking office in October. The Prime Minister spoke to local media before leaving, saying that he aims to strengthen economic and defense cooperation with the two countries. Now, Ishiba is scheduled to hold talks with Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim tomorrow and Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto on Saturday.
この地域の将来、あるいは安全保障、自由で開かれたインド太平洋の実現が国際社会の平和と安全に寄与するものだということ、そしてまた我が国にとっては重要なエネルギー供給国であります。これから先も安定的なエネルギーの供給をお願いしたいし、また両国の経済発展著しいものがありますので、そのことに対して我が国も寄与をこれから先もしていきたいというふうに考えております。
And for more, we are joined by CNA's Melissa Go in Kuala Lumpur. Mel, I believe the Prime Minister Ishiba has just landed in KL. Now, his first overseas trip as Premier, and it is in Malaysia. I imagine it signals quite an important strategic partner to Malaysia.
You know, although Japan only upgraded its status as comprehensive strategic partner with Malaysia end of 2023, its involvement in the country's development, especially in the push for industrialization, started way back in the early 80s during the tenure of former Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad under the Look East policy. Now, Japanese companies, Toyota, Mitsubishi, Panasonic, they were among the early investors here in the automotive industry, in the E&E manufacturing sectors. Now, Japan has helped train many engineers in Malaysia in the country's capacity building, in disasters reliefs, and also in maritime safety and security. But in the last 2 decades, I must say, it's been somewhat overshadowed by the rise of China and of multi-billion-dollar projects under the so-called Belt Road initiatives, so much so that Malaysia is seen by some as tilting or leaning towards China. Now, although Prime Minister Anwar has maintained that Malaysia is non-aligned and fiercely independent and will trade and do business with everyone, now Japan has consistently ranked among the top 5 foreign investors in Malaysia. In fact, Japan is Malaysia's 4th largest trading partner. Total trade exceeded $30 billion last year. And Malaysia, under Prime Minister Anwar, wants to build on that partnership and continue to drive more trade and investment with Japan, in particular in digital transformation and in energy transition. And speaking at the National Economic Forum earlier, Mr. Anwar revealed that the East Malaysian state of Sarawak has big plans to become a regional hub for renewable energy, and Japan can help, he said. And he will be discussing with Prime Minister Ishiba, together with Sarawak Premier Abang Johari Openg, along with the national and the state oil companies. Let's take them.
Dan kita bicara beberapa isu pelaburan, perdagangan, Dan juga suatu rencana baru yang sangat kritikal dari segi peralihan tenaga. Atas ikhtiar Premier Sarawak Abang Jo sama Petros dan kerjasama Petronas, dan kita harap dalam perbincangan itu akan mencana menjadikan Malaysia, khususnya Sarawak, sebagai hub tenaga bagi rantau ini.
Now, Sarawak has a huge oversupply of hydroelectric and is producing green hydrogen as well. Now, several Japanese companies have already invested in Sarawak, from solar to hydro. Now, the problem is connecting the grid, how to move the extra hydro capacity to demand centers here and make it affordable to Malaysia and to benefit ASEAN as a whole. Now, Japanese Prime Minister Mr. Ishiba, in an interview with the local media here in Malaysia before his trip, has said that he wants to help Malaysia and ASEAN to decarbonize, to create carbon credits to meet the net zero target by 2030.
Mel, what can we read from the timing of Mr. Ishiba's visit to Malaysia? And also, you talked about decarbonizing, but beyond that, what are both sides also hoping to achieve this time around?
Well, indeed, this is Mr. Ishiba's first official visit to Southeast Asia since he took office last October. And the fact that he picked Malaysia, is no surprise to many, because Malaysia is the ASEAN chair this year. And Prime Minister Anwar met him on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru last year and extended an invitation to him to visit Kuala Lumpur. Now, this, as Malaysia is embarking on digital transformation to spur growth through green technology, to energy transition, it requires a lot of funding and technological expertise and training for its people. Malaysia sees Japan as a reliable partner, while Japan sees Malaysia as a key in building supply chain resilience amid changing geopolitical landscape and the increased trade tensions between US and China. Japan really wants to strengthen its economic and trade ties and tighten security cooperation with Southeast Asian countries, with Malaysia in particular as ASEAN chair, to ensure that the region remains open and free.
Hey, many thanks for that report. CNA's Melissa Go in Kuala Lumpur. Well, over in South Korea, the legal team for impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol says that he will accept the Constitutional Court's ruling on his impeachment, even if it leads to his removal from office. However, the team has also filed a fresh injunction seeking to nullify an arrest warrant for the suspended leader. Well, one of his lawyers says that it will be unthinkable for any physical conflict during the execution of an arrest. He added that the attempts to detain Mr. Yoon is damaging South Korea's global status, and again confirmed that the impeached president is currently in his official residence. Mr. Yoon defied the court's request to submit legal briefs before a 27th December hearing, though his lawyers stated that he was willing to appear in person to argue his case. He also ignored multiple summons in a separate criminal investigation into allegations that he orchestrated an insurrection with his martial law bid. Barriers have been set up around his residence, which Yoon's lawyer says are intended to prevent any physical confrontation. The leader is facing renewed efforts to take him into custody, with a top investigator vowing to do whatever it takes to break the security blockade around his home.
현직 대통령을 지금 공수처와 경찰이 무슨 장갑차를 동원을 하겠다, 헬기를 동원하겠다. 이렇게 짧은 시간의 그 체포, 보여주기 체포를 위해서 이렇게 하는 것은 결코 정상적인 법 집행이라고 볼 수 없기 때문에 이러한 상황이 잘못되면 이것은 내전으로까지 갈 수 있다 하는 뜻입니다.
Rescue operations have been called off after Tuesday's earthquake in China's Tibet autonomous region. Chinese authorities say that they are shifting their focus instead to resettling the survivors and treating the injured. Well, the official death toll has remained unchanged for the last 48 hours, with 126 people killed and 188 others injured. Nearly half of those wounded are still receiving treatment. More than 45,000 people have been transferred to resettlement sites in towns surrounding the epicenter in Tingri. The 6.8 magnitude quake caused extensive damage, destroying more than 27,000 homes and 4 reservoirs. An investigation is underway to determine the scope of the disaster and losses incurred. Chinese officials ended the search for survivors yesterday after pulling a reported 407 people from the rubble. Well, experts are also saying that the chances of survival for those still trapped are slim, as they are likely to have succumbed to hypothermia. Meanwhile, Tibetans exiled in India held a candlelight vigil in Dharamshala, chanting prayers for the victims of the quake. The tremor struck Tingri County in Shigatse, affecting a population of some 800,000 people. It was one of the strongest earthquakes to hit the region in recent years, with the tremors felt as far as Nepal, Bhutan and India. Well, turning to Africa, more than a dozen gunmen have died in Chad after an attempt to storm the presidential complex in its capital on Wednesday. Well, the attack also left one security personnel member dead and several others injured. Reports say that tanks and a heavy security presence were observed on the streets. It is unclear what prompted the attack, which took place just hours after China's top diplomat Wang Yi met the Chadian president Mohamed Idris Deby Itno, along with other senior officials in a building. Mr. Wang was visiting the country as part of his week-long trip to Africa to advance ties with the continent. Mr. Deby, according to a government spokesperson, was in the complex at the time of the assault. China's foreign ministry, in response to reports of the attack, says that Beijing firmly supports Chad in its effort to keep the country safe and stable. Chadian authorities say 18 of the 24-strong commando unit that launched the assault were killed. Well, the rest, the spokesperson said, were easily overpowered. Officials add that the situation is under control after the destabilization attempt was put down. Well, here in Singapore, 3 self-radicalized Singaporean men were detained under the country's Internal Security Act in November last year. The trio, aged between 21 and 44, had been influenced by the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. Well, Singapore's Internal Security Department says that the cases are not related and the men had been separately self-radicalized online. Well, the authorities are also saying that the men had made preparations to engage in armed violence overseas. 2 of them, 21-year-old Muhammad Indra Akmal Effendi and 44-year-old Nurisham Yusuf, had planned to fight for Hamas and its military wing in Gaza. 41-year-old Muhammad Latif Rahim planned to fight alongside Iran's military and Iran-backed groups like Hezbollah in the Middle East. ISD says it has dealt with at least 5 Singaporeans whose radicalization was either triggered or accelerated by the Israel-Hamas conflict. It says these latest cases highlight how overseas conflicts can have an impact on Singapore's security. A time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, China deflation concerns deepen as consumer spending fails to pick up despite a raft of stimulus measures. And later, Japan says that foreign acquisition of 7-Eleven owner would be heavily related to national security, days after the Biden administration blocked Nippon Steel's takeover of U.S. Steel, citing similar concerns. Hello again, good to have your company on East Asia tonight. You are just in time for some business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, China's consumer prices refusing to budge despite a range of effort from policymakers. What's that all about?
Right, yes. The latest numbers suggest those efforts to revive spending will take some time to filter through. But first, China has determined the European Union's regulation on foreign subsidies imposed unfair trade and investment barriers on Chinese firms. The 2 economic powers have been locked in a wide-ranging standoff, most notably over Beijing's subsidies for its renewables and electric vehicle sectors. China has consistently denied that its policies are unfair and promised to take countermeasures if the EU's regulation posed a threat. But the Commerce Ministry's report did not specify any action Beijing plans to take following the conclusion of its investigation. The ministry's findings found that Brussels' selective enforcement of its regulations resulted in Chinese products being treated more unfavorably as compared to exports from countries outside the EU. Vague criteria on investigating foreign subsidies also placed a severe burden on targeted firms, and opaque procedures created huge uncertainties. The Chinese Commerce Ministry determined that surprise inspections allowed under the EU's foreign subsidies regulation, quote, clearly exceeded the necessary limits. It added that investigators were subjective and arbitrary on issues like market distortion. The scrutiny forced Chinese firms to abandon or to curtail projects, causing losses of more than $2 billion. China launched its probe into the EU's foreign subsidies regulation in July in what appeared to be a tit-for-tat move following Brussels' study into Chinese subsidies for electric vehicles. The EU then enacted its foreign subsidies regulation and imposed tariffs of up to 45% on Chinese electric vehicles. Beijing, seemingly in retaliation, levied provisional tariffs on brandy imports from the EU. Japan says it'll look into economic security aspects of any foreign acquisition of the owner of 7-Eleven. This as Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard pursues a takeover of the world's biggest convenience chain. Japan's economy minister highlighted the role Japan's convenience stores can play in times of crisis, particularly in remote regions, and questioned if it would be as cooperative if owned by a foreign entity. His comments come after U.S. President Joe Biden blocked Nippon Steel's $15 billion takeover of U.S. Steel, citing national security concerns. The move drew harsh criticisms from the Japanese government and businesses, with Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba urging Washington to dispel concerns over future investments between the two countries. Japan has invested almost $800 billion into the U.S. in 2023, and in September, the Japanese Finance Ministry designated 7&I as a core industry in terms of national security. Meantime, 7&I says its operating profit tumbled some 25% in the last quarter to $810 million as inflation hit consumer spending in Japan and North America. Now, experts say the poor showing adds to pressure on the sprawling retailer to improve corporate value amid buyout talks. China narrowly avoiding slipping into deflation in December, with prices rising at their slowest pace in 9 months. This as policymakers struggle to spur consumer activity. Consumer inflation weakened further towards zero, decelerating for a fourth straight month, which may fuel calls for Beijing to step up stimulus efforts. Prices at the factory gate remained stuck in deflation in December, declining 2.3% on year. But in a more encouraging sign for policymakers, core CPI, which excludes food and fuel prices, picked up for a third straight month, reaching its highest level since July. The ongoing near-zero inflation indicates that China's continuing struggle against weak domestic demand. The tepid reading comes after the government unveiled a range of measures at the end of last year, aimed at boosting consumption, as well as providing support for the troubled property sector. Sluggish spending, combined with persistent woes in the property sector and local government financing strains, has cast doubt over the feasibility of official growth targets. China emerged from a 4-month period of deflation back in February last year, and that was a month after suffering its sharpest fall in prices for 14 years. While deflation suggests the cost of goods is falling, it poses a threat to the broader economy as consumers tend to postpone purchases under such conditions, hoping for further reductions. And we spoke with Kai Wang from Morningstar earlier. He tells us how market investors are navigating China's deflation risks.
It's kind of par for the course for now, and we're kind of seeing that because there's not a lot of big ticket items being bought. So it's reflective of the deflationary trend that's going on right now. One thing we're seeing right now in China is that there's a trend of down trading, meaning that people are opting to spend, but they're spending on lower ticket items. They're taking shorter trips. They're taking when they do go on vacation, they're opting for lower star hotels rather than expensive hotels. And you're kind of seeing that in the consumer defensive sector as well, where people are kind of buying the non-premium items. They're opting for kind of cheaper items. this really kind of depends on how committed the Chinese government is to reviving consumer demand, right? It's really dependent on the fiscal support and the fiscal spending that it plans on doing in 2025. They've announced a series of stimulus. We are unsure whether these stimuluses will work, but as I think they appear to be very committed to doing so. And investors are relatively underweight in China right now. So every single time they do announce something, you're seeing a lot of gains immediately for a lot of the in the equity market there. But I think the key point is that China needs to we need to see more fiscal spending from China in order for this to happen.
Chinese markets slipping on Thursday on the back of those persistent deflationary pressures. Shanghai lost 0.6%, Hang Seng dipping 0.2%, but the Shenzhen component did put on 0.3% for the day. Now, in the currency space, renminbi offshore is 7355 to the dollar, onshore 7332 to the dollar. Largely unchanged, but still hovering around a 16-month low. The Chinese currency has recently been hitting record lows after a series of disappointing economic figures, added to concerns about slowing growth in the world's second-largest economy. In Beijing's latest step to defend the yuan, the PBOC is turning to its bond playbook to protect their currency. China's central bank will sell 60 billion RMB worth of 6-month bills in Hong Kong on the 15th of January. Now, that's equivalent to more than $8 billion and is the largest batch of short-term debt issued in Hong Kong since 2018, according to Bloomberg data. Debt sales is a way of supporting a weakening currency apart from interest rate action. Now, selling bonds helps soak up excess cash, raise demand for the currency, and tighten its supply offshore. Hyundai is planning to funnel more funds to boost domestic investment to a record high of some $16.6 billion this year. The group is looking to secure growth despite political and economic uncertainties. The planned investment includes nearly $8 billion in research and development for next-generation products, electrification, software-defined vehicles, hydrogen-fueled products, and other technology. It'll spend another $8 billion on ordinary investments such as adjusting production lines to make electric vehicles, and the rest on strategic investments such as autonomous driving. Hyundai Motor Chief Executive Chair Chung Yi-sun last week referred to a recession and global conflicts as external risks for the country. Shares in Hyundai Motor and Kia shot up 2.3% and 3.8% in early trade after the news. Hyundai ending the day in the red just slightly, but affiliate Kia did manage to hold on to its gains at the close. Shares of LG Energy Solution, one of the world's biggest battery makers, closing 4% in the red. Now, the South Korean firm reported a quarterly loss for the first time in 3 years, hit by slowing demand for electric vehicles. It reported a $154 million operating loss for the 3 months ended December, according to preliminary results. The cost of electric battery packs dropped around 20% in 2024 due to overcapacity. And in addition, European automakers are battling weak demand for EVs due to higher living costs and the removal of subsidies in some countries. Many, including General Motors and BMW, have scaled back production goals and slashed orders for batteries. Adding to these woes is the uncertainty about incoming President Donald Trump's plan to unwind EV initiatives. LG held an 11.2% share of the global EV battery market in the third quarter, while China's CATL and BYD held about 52% between them. LG Energy's chief has warned of a challenging business environment this year, adding the EV industry will likely rebound after 2026. And that is the latest in business. Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for another break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, a look at China's new prototype train aimed at cutting travel times as it continues to expand its high-speed network. We'll be speaking with an expert in just a moment. watching East Asia tonight. Shigeru Ishiba has arrived in Malaysia, having chosen Southeast Asia as the destination of his first overseas trip as Japanese Prime Minister. Now, he plans to discuss economic and defense ties with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim before continuing to Indonesia. Yoon Suk Yeol's legal team says that the impeached South Korean president will respect the Constitutional Court's ruling, even if it means removal from office. And rescue operations in Tibet have wound down following Tuesday's earthquake. Authorities are now shifting focus to resettling survivors and rebuilding. The U.S. has warned that North Korea is benefiting from its troops fighting alongside Russian forces. It says that Pyongyang is gaining battlefield experience that could be used against its Asian neighbors. An estimated 12,000 North Korean troops have been deployed to Russia to fight against Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk region.
The DPRK is significantly benefiting from receiving Russian military equipment, technology, and experience, rendering it more capable of waging war against its neighbors. In turn, the DPRK will likely be eager to leverage these improvements to promote weapons sales and military training contracts globally.
The UN Security Council has held a meeting over Pyongyang's hypersonic missile test earlier this week. North Korea defended the launch as part of its efforts to improve its defense capabilities and accused the U.S. of double standards.
Even today, when the civilian death toll exceeded 45,000 in Gaza, the United States embellished Israel's nefarious mass killing atrocity as the right to self-defense, arousing public indignation of the international community. Meanwhile, it takes the issue with legitimate exercise of the right to self-defense of the DPRK.
Russia has forged closer diplomatic and military ties with North Korea in recent years. Its UN ambassador accused the US, South Korea, and Japan of provoking the North with their military exercises and rejected American allegations that Moscow intends to share its satellite and space technology with Pyongyang. Well, Taiwan has wrapped up 3 days of annual military exercises in waters off the island's largest port of Kaohsiung ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday. Well, the drills were held to alleviate concerns over the island's ability to counter what they deem as threats from China. The Navy today simulated emergency and defensive tactics involving fast attack boats armed with anti-ship missiles and corvettes. Now, the corvette has been dubbed by Taiwan's Navy as the aircraft carrier killer due to its armament of anti-ship and anti-aircraft missiles.
Despite being classified as a smaller vessel, this can still deliver a formidable combat power against the loss of a larger PLA Navy ship. Therefore, this demonstrates the effectiveness of asymmetric warfare and Taiwan's commitment to defense self-reliance. Recent years, in response to PRC's persistent gray zone incursions, we are always ready to respond quickly and can handle any kind of maritime situation.
In China, the annual travel rush known as the Chunyun will soon be underway as people head back to their hometowns for the upcoming Chinese New Year holiday that's less than 3 weeks away. In what is the world's largest annual human migration, officials estimate that more than 500 million trips will be by railway alone, out of a total of 9 billion passenger trips. And high-speed trains are essential to get large numbers of passengers to their destinations quickly. And amid that flurry of activity, it's easy to forget that about a quarter of a century ago, only slower train services were available. Well, a trip from Shanghai to Beijing back then, for example, is simply a test of endurance. It could be at least a 12-hour journey or more. And today, with its locally made high-speed train, the fastest trip can be made in as little as over 4 hours. But that's not all. Enter the CR450. The prototype train was unveiled in late December after 7 years of development. It could zip along railway tracks at a top speed of 450 kilometers per hour, but will likely run at around 400 for regular operations. Still, it's nearly 15% faster than a 350 kilometer per hour top speed for China's existing high-speed trains. Well, more tests are needed in the meantime before it's certified for commercial use.
CR450动车组是我国为了进一步巩固和扩大我国高铁的技术领跑地位 而新研制的新一代的动车组，它具有更高速度、更加安全、更加节能、更加智能、更加舒适等特点。
Well, for more insights, we are joined now by Taku Tamaki. He's a lecturer in international relations at Loughborough University in the UK. Well, thanks so much for joining us this evening, Professor. So we have seen incredible advancements in high-speed rail technology, but Professor, do we really need them to go any faster?
Well, high-speed rail still has an attractiveness in terms of decarbonization, or for instance, if you want to release capacity on congested conventional lines, creating a new high-speed line to take international intercity passengers onto the high-speed rail, so to release capacity on the conventional lines for more inter-regional as well as freight trains makes perfect sense. So yes, high-speed rail has attractiveness. Whether you can actually have high-speed rail that is economically viable running at 400, I am not too sure at this moment.
And, I'm also curious to know that, are we nearing a peak when it comes to high-speed rail travel? Because demand has certainly grown rapidly, but is there like sort of a saturation point where further expansion might just simply not make sense?
There will be a saturation point at some point, but depending on the markets, I think we still have quite a bit to go. Places like Europe, for instance, still has quite a bit of demand for high-speed rail. It's a Japanese policy to expand its high-speed rail as well. And many emerging economies are looking at high-speed rail as another sort of new mode of transport. So I think it still has some life left in it.
And speaking of high-speed rail, of course, comparisons with neighboring countries like Japan and South Korea immediately come to mind. And I'm curious to know, Professor, how would you assess China's position in terms of competitiveness with Japan and Korea and these other countries?
I think the main takeaway from this current development is more geopolitical and geoeconomic. There's only so much you can go in terms of high speed, and there are questions about economic viability of running trains at very high speeds. Now, people are going to be looking at the components, how resilient they are, and whether the Chinese can actually keep on running trains at 400, again, for economic viable reasons. But it's one way for China to show the rest of the world that, look, we have this system that can run at 400. And so if an emerging economy wants a high-speed rail at 300, the Chinese could come in and say, would you like something that can go higher? Or if they're happy with 300, then they can sell their technology to say that, look, if you want to go at 300, we have something that can go at 400. It's safe, reliable, and economically viable. So it makes perfect geopolitical sense as well as geoeconomic sense. And another thing, it's a way for Chinese to say that, look, we are establishing a Chinese high-speed rail standard. So if you want a new high-speed rail, you can choose from the Japanese version or the European version, or for that matter, the Chinese standard. So it's a way for China to say that, look, if someone wants to buy high-speed rail, we have something to sell you.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that it's a sort of like national pride as well when you've got, this sort of a high-speed rail. And as a matter of fact, China has been successful in exporting its rail system across the globe. But I want to highlight that Japan, on the other hand, famous obviously for Shinkansen, hasn't experienced the same success. Is there something unique about China's approach that, gives it a clear edge?
One thing, of course, is the price competitiveness. Another, of course, this pertains more to the Japanese side, but the Japanese Shinkansen needs to be sold as a system. So the trains running on the tracks and the entire sort of the signaling system, electrical system, it works best. The Japanese system works best if it's an isolated system. So it has an appeal if an emerging market comes in and say, we want a self-contained high-speed system. In that case, Japanese Shinkansen might work better. But if you want to integrate high-speed rail as part of the conventional network, then system that is less self-contained, like the European system, or for that matter, the Chinese system, might appeal more.
And China has made huge strides towards self-sufficiency in rail technology. It's manufacturing its own parts. It's developing its own systems. How far do you think it has come on that front? And are they fully independent now?
As the report mentioned, I mean, it's only been for the past 25 years or so that the Chinese have developed this high-speed rail system. It's one of the largest systems in the world. It has by far the fastest trains in the world. And what I think the Chinese are trying to do with this new train is to show that the Chinese technology has matured to the extent that it is pioneering a new sort of 400-kilometer system that has not really been seen anywhere else in the world. So I think what China is trying to do over the next few years is to make sure this system works. And when it does, then they can go on and say, look, we have this Chinese system that is different from the other systems. We have something that can run at very high speed and can still be economically viable. So again, there is plenty of geopolitical and geoeconomic reasons which sort of very much in line with what the Chinese is saying in terms of Made in China 2025.
Right, and train diplomacy. I mean, China's train diplomacy, building networks for rail networks for other countries. We've seen it in the Belt and Road Initiative, for instance. It seems to be a key strategy for expanding its influence. But what are your thoughts in terms of how successful it has been so far for them?
I think it has been very successful. So, for instance, if you look at the Indonesian high-speed rail, initially the Japanese thought they could win the contract, but the Chinese ended up taking the prize, and elsewhere as well. And not just in terms of high-speed rail, but Chinese railway technology. And if you think about Huawei and 5G telecommunications, Chinese has been very successful in combining telecommunications with train running, which is very much important in terms of what the railway industry talks about in terms of digitalization. So the Chinese have acquired quite a bit of technology, quite a bit of know-how, and it seems that it is very confident of creating a system that is domestically produced and that can be sold around the world. So they're really building on the success so far.
So, Professor, what kind of innovations beyond just speed you think is going to drive the next phase of high-speed rail development?
It's to do with the digitalization, I think, in terms of signaling systems, communications, and also in terms of monitoring of the components, where if you can monitor components remotely, it saves on manpower, it saves on resources, saves on costs. So if the Chinese can fully do this in what they're saying they're doing with this new train that they have just developed, it is again a way for the Chinese to show that look, we are way ahead of the Japanese and the Europeans. And if you want a new, reliable, high-speed system, we have them.
I'll be looking out for those developments. Thank you so very much for spending your Thursday evening with us. Taku Tamaki, lecturer in international relations at Loughborough University. Well, we're going to go for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, fishermen in China's Heilongjiang province are finding it easier to fish in winter these few years. We'll tell you why. Also in China, intricate snow and ice sculptures draw in huge crowds in icy Harbin. Wildfires in Los Angeles have spread to the Hollywood Hills, adding to the challenges facing firefighters who are battling devastating blazes in the Southern Californian city. Well, the unfolding crisis is being blamed for at least 5 deaths. U.S. President Joe Biden has declared the wildfires a major disaster and cancelled a planned trip to Italy to focus on a federal response. Ira Spitzer has more from L.A.
Terrifying and anxious scenes continue throughout Los Angeles as a number of wildfires continue to burn throughout this city and county. For residents, it's been a nightmare scenario. Tens of thousands of people have fled their homes, and many of those people don't know what they're going to come back to. The city officials have already confirmed that more than 1,000 structures have been destroyed. that number could certainly increase as the scale of the damage becomes clear. And just when it looked like perhaps the weather conditions were shifting to make firefighting conditions more favorable, there was news of a new fire that had broken out in the Hollywood Hills. This fire actually very close to some well-known landmarks such as the Hollywood sign and Hollywood Boulevard. And there have been reports of some issues on the ground, including water not being readily available in some cases for firefighters battling the Palisades fire. That's one of the biggest fires here. That has led to criticism of public officials. Public officials have pushed back, saying that with the sheer number of fires going on, water resources were just impossible to manage completely in that situation. The mayor of Los Angeles also facing some criticism for taking an overseas trip to Ghana for that president's inauguration earlier in the week, and she was actually there when these fires broke out. Got on a flight back to Los Angeles, but some questions being asked about whether that was the appropriate place to go, given the danger that the city was in and the fact that we had been hearing about this high fire danger for some days. But for the most part, mainly people here are just concerned and want this to end, worried about friends and family, worried about pets who may have been left behind. There are evacuation shelters throughout the city. So with the situation still ongoing, hope here that in the coming days things will get better, but for now, a very dangerous situation in Los Angeles. Ira Spitzer, CNA in Los Angeles.
Well, apocalyptic visuals of the massive wind-driven wildfires seen spreading on the ground in California, also spreading on social media. Many residents going online to document their experiences as authorities scramble to contain the blazes and prevent further damage.
All right, dude. Yeah, let's get out of here. We tried, bro. I'm sorry.
This video posted on social media platform Instagram shows two men making a harrowing escape from a house engulfed by flames. Terrifying blazes have leveled whole streets in just a few seconds, torching vehicles and trees alike. Now, others who attempted to flee faced traffic jams, which prompted them to abandon their cars. Those vehicles ended up blocking the path for more people, causing many to be trapped longer in areas affected by the fires.
Is it okay? You gotta be okay. Hi? You gotta be okay.
But not all were in a rush to leave. Despite being told to evacuate immediately, some residents chose to hunker down in their homes. Authorities have warned against it. They say that a large portion of those who refused to leave suffered severe injuries. Now you can head to CNA.Asia, where we hear from Singaporeans who are living in Los Angeles and dealing with the rapidly evolving wildfire crisis. Well, back to East Asia, where Japan is experiencing heavy snowfall, especially in regions along the Sea of Japan coast. Well, authorities warn that snow will accumulate in areas that usually don't get that much snow, and that this may cause major traffic disruptions. Residents have been urged to take precautions and to be on alert for snow falling from roofs, avalanches, and power outages due to the icy buildup on power lines and trees. Forecasters predict the sub-zero conditions will persist through tomorrow. Meanwhile, temperatures in parts of South Korea have plunged below -10 degrees Celsius. Officials have issued a new cold wave advisory for all of Seoul and northern regions. The lowest temperature of -20 degrees was reported in the mountainous region of Gongwon. Now, a member of the Japanese criminal underworld, Takeshi Ebisawa, has pleaded guilty to trafficking nuclear materials from Myanmar. He faces up to 20 years imprisonment. According to U.S. authorities, the leader of the transnational criminal network smuggled uranium and weapons-grade plutonium, presumably to Iran for its nuclear weapons program. All these to fund his purchase of weapons, including surface-to-air missiles for an armed insurgent group in Myanmar. Ebisawa also admitted to sending large quantities of heroin and methamphetamine to the United States. The U.S. investigators earlier seized powdery yellow substances that Ebisawa called yellow cake, a uranium powder with low radioactivity that can be further processed for enrichment. One of his co-conspirators claimed that they possessed more than 100 kilograms of that substance. Now, some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. Kyoto News says that police have charged a 43-year-old man with the murder of a 15-year-old girl after the stabbing attack at a McDonald's restaurant in southwestern Japan last month. The other victim, a 15-year-old boy, sustained severe injuries and was hospitalized. The South China Morning Post report says that Chinese hospitals are treating more cases of flu than human metapneumovirus, or HMPV, this winter, according to doctors at facilities around the country. Well, the flu-like disease can cause respiratory illness in people of all ages, especially young children, older adults, and those with weakened immune systems. And the Korea Times says that South Korea is looking to become the biggest oyster exporter in the world in a bid to surpass mega producers such as France and China. Officials say the size of the global oyster market is worth around $600 million. China's northernmost Heilongjiang province has welcomed its ice fishing season with thousands of fishes harvested from frozen lakes. Every year, 73-year-old Guo Junchun braves the icy conditions to fish at the frozen Songhua River in the northeastern city of Harbin. The region is one of China's coldest, where the winter fishing season usually spans across 3 months. To the fishermen's surprise, it has become easier to net their catch in recent years.
冬钓那冰雹还是有好的哈，你冬钓的时候，你这冰雹好打眼儿，打窟窿浅呢打的少，一打就开了。你冰厚了一打的太深了，也费力气。
They attribute climate change for making Harbin's bitter cold less harsh as they used to be. Guo says that temperatures used to drop to as low as minus 37 degrees Celsius, but nowadays it does not fall below an average of minus 30 degrees. A stay in Harbin, the Chinese city is quickly filling up with ice and snow sculptures after the country's biggest international ice and snow festival began on Sunday. The event attracted dozens of sculptors from around the world to showcase their talent. In just a few days, these artists turned blocks of ice and snow into intricate pieces of art.
整体呢是以一个童话故事的感觉来去做的。那我们在构思上呢，现在是以一个拱门的这样的一个造型，然后呢，拱门的后面是一个世界，然后拱门的内部是一个世界。那么这个有一个人物，然后从一个世界穿越到另一个世界去追寻探索另一个世界的这样的一个秘密。然后在整体的装饰设计上面呢，采用了这种罗马柱啊、科斯林柱饰啊，包括玫瑰花等等这样的一些造型，来去丰富它的整体的一个美观度。
那异兽路呢，就像是我们画面中所看到的这样的一个卷轴，所有的冰雪异兽呢，都仿佛从卷轴里面生成出来，鲜活的走了出来一样。这是我们创作的整体灵感。
And that's all we've got for you for Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.